Good evening. We'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. Mr. Zink, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Argo. Ms. Casper.
Here.
Mr. Horton. Mr. Wynn.
Here.
Ms. Schaefer.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I need a motion to approve the agenda, please.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Mr. Zink, please call the roll.
Mr. Wynn.
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer.
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes. All right, we will go right into master's facility. Dr. Whiteley, we have some guests that want to join us.
We do. Tom Fernandez, our architect, is going to come to the table, and Jens also is going to come to the table. I think I see Jens there. Jens, I can't really see past the first couple rows.
It's hard to see. We can't see out there. It's dark. So you could all be cardboard cutouts for all we know, like at the Academy Awards.
And again, just inviting them to the table to make sure, they're important voices in the conversation, particularly just around, finances, design, political landscape, all of those different pieces. We'll kind of work through the conversation. We just saw each other a couple days ago, right? But really the conversation, or continuing the conversation, kind of around three aspects, and I think we landed on, they're all interconnected, right? These are not separate or divorced from each other, but the idea of what option will we eventually land on for a master facilities plan? What is the timeline of that plan? Or what time do we go on the ballot? And then ultimately, what does that ballot look like as far as millage, just really how all of those align, right? So making sure we understand those aspects. On Monday, I've got to get my days right here. On Monday, we started to talk about options, right? We talked about kind of where we'd been as far as options. We also talked about what I would call C1 and D1. Those are also linked in the board docs that you have there if you want to reference those. And I know some of you have your green folders. Super appreciative that we didn't have to kill any more trees on that one. But I also have an extra copy if you need it. But really looking at C1 and D1. And C1 and D1 came from pretty lengthy conversations kind of in Master Facilities Subcommittee about why options A through E were maybe not the best options to continue exploring or continue to iterate on. It doesn't mean that they're not options, but they had at least some complexities or some issues that we felt they could be taken off the table. Also in your folder and also in the board docs are the themes from our community sessions, whether that was in person or survey data. And one of the things that we discussed is that really the priorities of our community continue to hold pretty true from the data that we collected all the way back in 2018 and beyond. And what I mean by that is flexible learning spaces. I will say that's probably not a phrase that our community used. They would say future ready, adaptability, flexibility, things that mirror kind of the college and workforce readiness pieces, but we would encapsulate that into flexible learning spaces. Then we also have grade bank configurations or transition points is how we labeled it, or our community labeled it, just more continuity. Class sizes, again, particularly in K-6. And then last but not least, safety and security being multi-pronged. The new priority that kind of rose to the top in our listening sessions was a phased approach from our community. That they thought that, and again, depending on the perspective, it could deal with the cost piece, it could deal with the political landscape that we're in, it could deal with, hey, I need a visualization of what perhaps a building project could get me, and then I might be able to get behind. I also know that the word phase implies, again, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, but really what we're talking about is what would we do now, and now can be extrapolated however we want, but what would we do now, and then we would engage our community about what is next, or what could be next, or what do we want to be next. So really looking at the now possibility, and then continuing to engage the community of further phases per se. In C1, really the differentiator between C1 and D1, again, about the same price point for our community, but really the main difference, and there are some other subtleties, but the main difference is 2 junior highs and 4 junior highs. So I'm going to leave it at that, just to note, to kind of jog your memory and bring us where we were. I didn't know if you had any reflection points on C1 or D1 after some marination, maybe since Monday, or some reflection points, and then we can certainly talk about some different pieces from there.
Does anybody want to start? Okay, I'll start. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I will say, like, after thinking about it and how everything went the other day, I did think some of us have had the benefit of spending a lot more time in the subcommittee meetings and reviewing all the different options than others. I know others, even before they were on the board, were, attending those meetings and the audience and following very closely. So I did think, and again, some feedback from some people who were here, like, whoa, it was a lot for some people who we hadn't brought along in the journey. And so I do think perhaps if we might want to have some more background from the folks over on that side of the table of just why, like, I know we talked about, we went through different iterations, but maybe just a little more conversation about what our wants were, what our needs were, what we felt was our North Star from our community of the most important things, that it was clear that what I've at least continued to hear is this isn't going to be, necessarily an exciting plan, but we're looking for a plan that is practical and gets us as close to as many of our community's objectives for the least amount of money. And if we look at that as our North Star, that's kind of how we landed where we were. Are there others? I mean, again, we felt like what would work best was what we originally proposed, but clearly we've had to pivot because that was not a priority to a majority of our community. So perhaps that was my takeaway, is like maybe we just need to slow it for a minute tonight and kind of help walk through that and why we landed where we did, for the benefit of those who haven't spent hundreds of hours in meetings going over all of this.
Tom, we can tag team, yeah.
Yep. Well, first of all, after the election, a lot of data was collected, 12 listening sessions, and a survey, and I think, as was noted, there was about 1,000 individuals who responded. There were also a lot of other conversations that individuals had during the campaign and then afterwards. And so one of the things that I think you could solidly say is that some of the sticking points were at the elementary levels, having to do with the buildings, why so many buildings are being taken offline. Gee, this building is only 35 years old, why are we tearing it down? And while I think the state and our team and the Skanska team could support the conclusions of why, ultimately it's the voters that you need to listen to and take a pause on and have an extended conversation. And I think that's one of the things we realized and came out of all these discussions. So then you're faced with, well, what is the greatest impact in terms of operational for the district, in terms of grade band configuration? How can you best impact those students? And then even things like bringing back this notion of neighborhood schools. And a lot of people during the campaign talked about, oh, I want to keep my neighborhood school. Well, we don't really have neighborhood schools here at Lakota, but we will, according to either C1 or D1. So there's a lot of things that we looked at. What was good, what we could all agree and move ahead. And there was only one variation of that I think you have in front of you, which is, should we have 4 middle schools or 2? And that ultimately, even in picking that choice, there's the reality is as you design the 2 new the 2 new middle schools, you could design it so that at a later point you can convert it into an elementary. So if you plan ahead, it's easy to convert. So if later on you say, hey, we want to complete, and the community comes back and says, hey, we like this original plan, well, that's great. But, you still have that option. So it's where you put your money now that you know it's going to be guaranteed to last, to support a long-term solution. And it might be the only phase. I think the superintendent wisely said it's the now plan, but we don't know if there is going to be a future plan. I think in terms of, and if I could keep going, I don't know how much, but I think we also have to talk about, in terms of the why now, I think it has to be, we have to show some, one of the comments that we've heard over and over again, it's a financial decision. And there is an opportunity now that wasn't as defined as before the election, during the election, and it's the whole notion of the state, and when is the state going to come with their dollars? Are they going to have dollars in the future? Are they a good partner? And from our experience, I will tell you that they are a good partner. And why would the district not take advantage of 32% match when everyone in the community has been paying the taxes, the dollars have been going to Columbus? It's an opportunity to get those dollars back. So now, just during that election period, they gave us a call. We had another call earlier this week to verify, to see where they are in terms of timing. The way they describe it is that Lakota is on the bubble for being funded in July of this year.
In July of what?
Of this year.
26.
26.
Wow.
So it's on the bubble, and how they manage their dollars is they get a pot of money, and they have to look and see, well, what schools are moving ahead with their plans, who's going to delay, what kind of costs are each of the plans, do they have enough, and they evaluate to see how many, and they have a criteria of where you are on the list. And usually when they call you and say, hey, you're on the bubble, that's a really good thing. They don't get you excited. The state doesn't like to get you excited. So I think it's a good indication, but if it doesn't happen this year, it likely will either happen in January or the following year. So if you move ahead with a plan, you don't have to do the whole project. You could do a portion of the project, and that portion will get the state share. We'll segment the project, as a lot of school districts do. Columbus, I think they're on their third or fourth segment. So most school districts have approached it that way, especially when it's a larger ask. So that's a really good thing. I know that dollars probably need to be discussed sometime today, so we could give you a better definition of what that looks like. So I think that's just a few comments.
I think to Tom's point, after reflecting from Monday, and I think a lot about this from my seat, your priority drives your approach, right? And I think, there was some discussion on Monday about class size, and class size is certainly important, do not get me wrong, but so are grade bands to our community, and so is safety and security, and so are flexible learning spaces. So the notion was brought up to build one elementary school. That gets you a slice of the pie, not the things that we were trying to accomplish. And certainly that would give some relief in K5, or actually it would be K6, because if you just built a new elementary school, you're still in the K6 model because you don't have any grade bank configuration. So I think to Tom's point, and Julie, to your point, is we're trying to have a very fiscally responsible plan that can check the box of, and I don't say check the box flippantly, can meet the needs of our community as many asks that they gave us. And class size, depending upon the survey or the focus groups, I'd say we're neck and neck about what is important. And so I think that, and we also talked about this early on, kind of when I came aboard, of we would like to have an approach that touches all of K through 12, so you don't get a, well, this is a K6 solution, or this is a 7-12 solution, like that everybody feels like they're getting a benefit or a lift. And so I think when you talk about comprehensive high schools, you talk about grade, middle school approaches where you can get some more electives, and you get class size in there with those grade bands. I think that's a win-win for everybody if we can hit the right price point, versus I build one new elementary where certain children are going to go, but not everybody's going to go. I feel like 7 and 12 would go, well, where am I in that? And then depending on the elementary that you go to, that's only 800 children that could possibly benefit from that, not the rest of the district.
Well, and if I may add, building one elementary doesn't solve your problems. You really have to build 3 elementaries in order to house your student population by 2033.
Yeah,
So,
one elementary would help us right now with basically our overcapacity, because we're overcapacity by about 750 children. I mean, that's one school building. So to Tom's point, that's a very short-term fix for a long-term problem that's going to continue to increase by about 2,000 children.
For me, the sense of urgency for me comes from the fact that we're trying to solve a lot of what our community wants. I don't remember anybody in any of the focus groups, and I don't think it hit on these themes, that were negative against the grade band configure, correct? So I do believe that that is still valid from 2018, and I know that there was some discussion on Monday that we haven't engaged our community in that discussion. I feel like we have engaged our community in that discussion. And again, I have had the benefit into being hours in meetings, and so I do understand why we got here. But for me, the sense of urgency, not only is it to help alleviate all of the issues we have across the district, but we have a lot to do in the district otherwise, and we can't move forward if we can't get a master plan. If we can't do something, we can't move forward with everything else that we need to do. Correct, Dr. Whiteley?
Adam and I talk about this quite a bit. When you talk about strategic planning and you talk about master facilities, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? And that's kind of Adam's phrase, but I agree with him, right? I mean, you can build a strategic plan without a master facilities plan. When you talk about exciting, I think that would be less exciting to build a strategic plan in the current known environment, classroom restraints, and things that we have, versus we have a master facilities plan that would open some doors and allow some flexibility to really talk perhaps more proactively and creatively about efficiency of staff use, about electives and opportunities for our children, about specials, which are a whole other brand or strand rather of what we heard in our community sessions. So you can have one without the other, but when they complement each other, that is where you get synergy. And so one divorced from the other creates some lag probably in where we want to be in becoming a destination district.
And I know I feel like these plans, we've listened to some of the objections that we heard in the community. The cost, definitely, I mean, I think it's almost in half. The fact that they didn't want us to demolish 10 buildings, and the fact that we are getting rid of the overcrowdedness or the overcapacity and bringing the 9th graders into the high school, which we know is a good thing for them. They kind of are on an island out here. So I just feel like there's a sense of urgency, because I feel like we're going to lose momentum. We're going to possibly have to make some tough decisions we may have to make some tough decisions if we don't have a master's facility plan, and I don't like the idea of compromising programming or the best quality education that our students deserve.
I also think busing continues to kind of be a lens or a voice, depending on the angle that it's coming from. You know, and Kelly, I just said this to you before the meeting. Busing is really unique in that every year you have different data. So every year you have a different set of kids riding the bus. They've changed grade bands. They perhaps had different family environments that changed their locations. They've moved, all of that. So data for busing is reevaluated each and every year, not only in terms of ridership, but routes. So when people talk about, you know, I'm concerned about the length of time my kid will be on the bus, all of that, they're looking at our current data. And again, that all changes every year, right? And so I think looking at that freshly, once you have a master facilities plan, and then really making sure that we have parameters that are important about distance and walkability when possible, and all of those, that would come into play in making sure that we would route appropriately to have the most efficient, safe, effective routes for our families and our students.
So, Ben and Alex, I'm going to put you on the spot. Now that you've had 24 hours to look, 48 hours to look at these, would you like to weigh in on, if you have a preference, what your thoughts are?
Between these two options, I guess I kind of look at it and I think when we have the 4 middle schools, I think that will satisfy more people now, and I feel like potentially the 2 middle schools sets us up more for kind of future variability. Tom, you did talk about, you know, making sure if we go the 4 middle school route, that you can build that with flexibility in mind, you know, in case things change down the road or things like that. Do we have any other buildings in the district that were built with that type of flexibility, or is it kind of that's the only way we could? Like
Plains.
I've heard
Plains, yeah, Plains is kind of
Plains
built
was
in
built
that
to be-
model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like to me, like I'm guessing we were at East Freshman the other day for some gym awards, and it seems like if that had been built with some flexibility, and we've talked about how it may not be easy if we were to make that an elementary school, but it seems like we could almost do the 2 middle schools and build one down where Hopewell is as kind of a variation, if that would make sense. But
A 3rd middle school?
no, so in some of the plans we've had in the past, we had East Freshman as becoming a K-5 building, and I'm not sure what the possibilities of that would look like. But if we did that, we could. If we went for the 2 middle school model, it seems like it might check all the boxes that people had. If we could expand Plains and then maybe in like the Hopewell space, build a junior high. But again, I'm not sure what the feasibility of that is with kind of how East Freshman has been built and it's set up. It doesn't sound like it's very flexible to kind of go that way.
I'll pick kind of a couple things with East Freshman. I mean, furniture's furniture. I mean, you'd have to have all new furniture just for size of bodies. I think the more complexity becomes when you look at restrooms. Also just, and again, it's a building design piece, you know, bigger people, bigger ceilings, there's just a more, there's a height differential that you get into there because you don't want small bodies to feel lost. So I think anytime you're looking at like, the Innovation Hub was probably fine, but like the cafeteria, even the gymnasium a little bit, any of those kind of bigger communal spaces, restrooms, furniture, I definitely think those would have to be kind of reconfigured. And you know, there are some spaces in our elementary world where, particularly like kindergarten, K2, where some rooms have designated bathrooms because of the age, so they don't have to traverse down the hall. So I think those are the areas that you're looking at that would have to be reconfigured. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't work, but I do think, it's not aesthetics, it's more of a feel of how children would feel in such a cavernous building versus something that is more intimate. Do you know what I mean? When you go into Wyandotte, when you go into younger, smaller people buildings, they just feel more like cozy and things. Not that secondary, the world feels cold, but it's just a different design element a little bit. But it could work, but we would definitely have to look at some communal spaces, restrooms, and furnitures to be adapted. Because otherwise, you're gonna get the heritage model that we have right now, where you have bathrooms that are not fitting for the age, and you've got stools and all of that stuff to be accessible.
The other issue is that you're going to have a high concentration with Liberty, Woodland, and East Freshman of K to 5, all within a very close, in Independence, close proximity to each other. So that would be the other question for you. You know, it's never a perfect plan. Having Woodland and Liberty together, we've already discussed those and how it could possibly be linked and improved. But I think you'd have to look at your student population, where your demands are, and the question is, would that location be the best for another K-5?
Yeah, that would put three near each other. When we talk about, I lost my train of thought. It's all you, Ben.
All right.
Hopefully it'll come back to me.
Yeah, I got to bring out my actor voice because I was listening back on Monday and I can't even hear myself. I will say, looking over at the plans, I like option C. I think it addresses, or C1, whatever it was. I think it addresses the question of Adena, which, as Dr. Whiteley said, seems to be one of the worst buildings aside from West Freshman Creekside. Tom, I think it was you or Dr. Whiteley that said that we needed a plan that increases our student count to accommodate about 2,000 extra kids by 2033. Was that correct? 2033. Which is 3 new elementary schools, and I'm looking at 3 buildings that are decommissioned and then 2 additions. When I think about a master facilities plan, I want to think of something that is accommodating the future, right? It's flexible, but it addresses the questions that we're going to see in the future. So not just thinking about 2025 or what we need right now, but also thinking about what we need in 2033. Are both of these plans with 2033 in mind and with that 2,000 extra student count in mind?
Yeah, if you look at this sheet, the sheet that complemented each of those, Tom's team did a nice job of making sure that they had accounted for not only our current, but at making sure that we had the square footage to meet the enrollment needs of the future of that anticipated growth.
Okay, I see. So the plans addition, the addition is going to be about 300 new students there?
Which option are you looking at?
I'm looking at option C.
C.
Right now, the existing is 940. Okay, so.
Yes, that would be approximately 150,000 square foot addition to the Lakota Plains as well as East Freshman. And the other thing that really is helping in terms of the student population is shifting the 9th graders to the high school and doing those 2 additions. That is a major impact for you.
I will say, I had my 9th grade parent hat on. My daughter will be a freshman next year, and I was looking through the program of studies and just looking at coursework and things. And regardless of master facilities, the freshman being a standalone building absolutely creates some complexities for efficient staffing models and pathways. And it's because you have traveling staff to make sure that you meet course sequencing. Like just for example, I'm going to pick on, if you have a student who coming from another district, let's say you have a student coming from another district and they take Spanish 1 in the 8th grade, okay? If you come to Lakota East Freshman or West Freshman, you can't take Spanish 2 because it's not offered. It's only offered at the main campus. When you have a comprehensive high school, You can offer it to any grade band. So there's just some limitations in our current configuration without a comprehensive high school of scheduling and staff efficiency. And I knew that, but when I put my parent hat on and just tried to create some real pathways for even my own child, I was like, okay, we're gonna have to really, she's gonna have to double up on some things just because of the limitations of the freshman building to be able to open up options for her later on in 10th through 12th grade, where if you had a comprehensive high school, it would not be nearly that complex for our families and our students.
I have to say, I'm relatively content with both of these plans, but certainly option C. That's not a yes or no on either of them. I think, again, I'd like to see, the buildings with that firsthand perspective. But I do think that a lot of these plans, and I'll restate what I said on Monday. Doug said that he was unexcited or Mr. Horton said he was unexcited by both plans. Again, I have to say that coming down from $506 million to a $289 million plan, I think that's exciting. Because for me, it says we have listened to our community. We're heading in the right direction. And again, nothing else mattered to them besides the cost. And when we go down and we, relatively half the cost, I think that is a good first step to our community that we listen to you. And so I think that if we came back, again, not saying that I think May 5th would be preferable, but if we came back with the same plan or relatively, similar cost, I think that we would have just been completely tone deaf. But kudos to the staff and to Tom's team on coming back with a plan that I would say addresses a lot of what we were talking about, addresses a lot of what the community listening sessions told us were priorities of the community, and then also address, like I said, the number one issue, which was the cost.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add on to that, kind of on a couple points. But, like a couple of us have already said, it seems like the comprehensive high schools, there's not much in terms of people who think that's not a good idea. The parts of the plan that both of these, accomplish are the parts that there is wide agreement on. And it's the majority of the plan. I think one thing that we heard a lot was that part of the reason we didn't have success was because there was kind of a trust issue, whether that's with maintenance or with other things. And it almost seems like, kind of to Ben's point, either of these options would allow us to, deliver some of what everyone is asking for and give us the opportunity to build trust before we, go into that next phase of things. I do think both of these options are, I would be okay with potentially. I wonder if, to me almost, if we can say these options are the direction we're heading, it's almost, the next question becomes, are we okay with the timing that we've been talking about to make that happen? So, yeah, I wonder if, it seems like that's kind of where most people's heads are. Would it make sense to talk about the timing some?
Mm-hmm. Can I say a couple things before we go there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I remember what I was going to say. I prefer the C1. I like the 2 junior high option. I like the middle school option. I like what we can get from that. However, I could live with D1. My question is, could in the future, if you did D1, in the future, could you go back to the middle school option? Or would it be once we do it, we do it?
No, as long as those buildings are designed so that you could convert them in the future to elementary, the 2 new buildings, then you could easily, it would require an addition at that point, but yes, you could move from D1 to C1 option for you.
Because I think that there are still some community members who don't like the giant high school, junior, middle schools, even though it's, you know, you would be able to build it like the house concept and they'd be in their own cohorts, which is what I like about it. But I wonder if down the road you could convert, if we decide to go that way, convert it into 2 high schools, or 2 middle schools. I also think that, I know that both Mrs. Schaefer and I talked about a sense of urgency, but I now feel even more of a sense of urgency if our number could actually come up in July. That would be huge. That would be huge. And so, anything else, Mrs. Schaefer?
I guess just one follow-up question to that, with the potential change in timing of our number coming up, does that allow us then to do some renovations potentially with some of those credits sooner on those elementary schools? Would that be a thought, or unclear?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Adam because this is all his territory, but I think we've heard from you before that if you go with a no-cost increase, similar to what Monroe had done and other school districts have done, then you're only raising $225 million. So then you have a gap between that and the 289, which would be filled by the state.
Okay.
So you get credit for the dollars, the 225. So essentially, they would be building in total, they would be building one of your newer middle school buildings. The timing of it could actually work rather well, and even if your number doesn't come up now, if it comes up in January, if the voters move ahead, you can begin, the design process takes about 10 months. So you're in the design phases anyway. You're not moving too much dirt. You might be doing an early site package. Nate is in the audience. I'm going to throw something if I say something incorrectly, but so you can move ahead, and when your number comes up, whether it's in 26 or 27, you're ready to go and start on the construction side. So there is that advantage of being ready when you get that phone call.
So previously, we'd intended to save those credits for future needs. This would be having potentially those future credits, since they're not so future, potentially co-fund this project at a current basis.
Right.
Adam, was that one
That's
nod
what I'm
a
taking.
true
That's
nod?
what I'm. That's what I'm gathering. I've been doing
Okay.
some spreadsheeting here.
Spreadsheeting.
I've been doing a little spreadsheeting, and so I was trying to figure out if we were talking a 281 or if we were talking about 281 total all in. Where a 281, if it was total all in, would be around 191 million our share ish. Is that correct, Tom?
It's actually 289.
Oh, 289, sorry, I had it as 281. Okay, and then I was figuring in the 225, 72.
So you're going to have about $4 or $5 million additional left over that might be applied towards renovations. Not only that, but during, from now on, one of the things we're going to make sure, work with Craig so that the dollars you spend on replacement of boilers or roofs, that we're getting credit for those so that they can share in those costs. It's called discrete portions, and you just define to them, you have a master plan, and then you're just doing the first segment, and the second segment, you want to start to build up those credits. So all the, everything that is being performed on the other schools, that's part of the master plan, and that doesn't get torn out later on because of sequencing. Those all get build up credits. So
I think that renovation piece is important, particularly to what Ben said. If you choose D1, Adina's gonna need a little love. Because it is, and I'm speaking for Craig and I, we've discussed this at length, it needs some help. And so I think to just make sure that if we choose D1, that we do have some dollars to put into kind of the next high-risk buildings. Risk is maybe not the word, but yeah, there's gonna need to be some renovations or maintenance, or however you wanna describe that, to some existing buildings to keep them, just make sure that they're, safe and meeting some educational needs and bathrooms and facilities and things.
Ask another question.
Pardon?
Can I-
Yeah, oh, yeah.
For operational savings, is there a significant difference longer term between C1 and D1 if we're looking for a long-term, day-to-day operational savings? Everyone's looking at, who's gonna answer?
Anybody at all?
Well,
That would come down to the staffing.
right, I mean, there's the staffing piece, and then I think, you know, you're taking, it's what dollars you free up, right? So like in C1, you've taken 3 buildings offline, and you have essentially new, right, heavily, you know, additions, those kind of things, and so you get some operational savings from the offline piece. In D1, you've taken some buildings offline, but you've got 2 new buildings and some other buildings that haven't been touched, and you have to touch more, like in Adina and things. So I think there's a staffing piece, and then there's an operational piece of what is left to maintain, and those boilers and things, and that's where that contract for that comprehensive and capital plan becomes important, in making sure that we stagger those accordingly.
But I guess just logically, I'm even thinking that, you know, again, if you have 2 fewer middle schools, then
In staffing, it's more effective.
yeah,
More
like,
efficient.
and just, we could better utilize the staff that we have to potentially provide additional opportunities beyond the operational savings.
Correct.
So it would be a double piece of more effectively using the staff to deliver what we're delivering.
Mhm.
And,
Because you've mirrored the grade, so either way, C1 or D1, you've mirrored the licensure bands, you've reduced the traveling, at least in some pockets, you know, in 7 through, or 6 through 12. So absolutely being able to use more efficiently becomes definitely a possibility in both.
2 fewer head principals, maybe some more assistant principals, like that.
Well, we've talked something as simply as the high schools, right? When you take the freshman building over into the main campus, you have an associate principal, you have an assistant principal. You know, we're pretty lean in administrators. I know some people would say that we're not, but when you really look at that CUP report, we are. And so then you have the ramification of behavioral needs, all of those things being addressed, which again is a cultural element, but also just you're not looking to add staff, you're looking to repurpose staff. And that's what we had our conversations with staff, like a nurse. When I have 2 new junior highs, I'm not getting rid of necessarily nurses. I'm taking 2 nurses and putting them in a junior high because it's harder to manage the safety needs and the health needs of that population. And then at the same time, you have attrition going on. Attrition, educational word of people retire, people leave on their own accord, and you reevaluate the needs at that time. So there's also some of those additional savings that we can look at for efficiency, just like we do every year.
Would it be safe to say that you could get additional student growth out of 6th grade through 6th, 7th, and 8th being in the same building, as well as, like you'd mentioned with your daughter, scheduling the 9th through 12th building, to where then you would have the ability to add some of the upper end classes maybe in the junior high model, so that then as the
Yeah, you
kids
can-
were
Like, I'm gonna pick on world
Evolving
language.
further.
World language, you can easily, in that model, when you have comprehensive high schools and 2 junior highs, you can look at, that you would create a traveling situation, or perhaps, depending on the schedule and student interest, you could absolutely capitalize and bring world language, maybe even with our existing staff. I'm gonna pick on Latin. We probably have the flexibility to do that. Also in K2, if you remember when we looked at the report card, we see a gap in our report card data from 2nd grade to 3rd grade in literacy, and we have explored this. It is definitely because of that break that we see and that lack of continuity. So bringing K2 into a K5 band, you should see some improvement in literacy naturally because of the flow and the less handoff of students.
Right.
So the problem with
just-
that's a value add that you would capture that wouldn't necessarily result in a operational savings that we might think of as dollars hitting the bank account. It would just be redistributing the dollars we're currently spending in a more productive way.
And I think the key to repeat, repurposing your staff. We're not going to be laying off tons of people if we go to 2 junior highs.
We should be able, through attrition, again, being retirements or people who voluntarily leave for whatever life event, we should be able to manage that without having to talk about, reductions in forces.
Because, if you're going to put X amount of kids in a big junior high, you're going to need more than one principal and one assistant.
And I can't have one nurse for
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but you're going to
Or
have.
one
to have-
counselor, or one. Any other questions on the options, thoughts? All right, what do you want to tackle next?
I think it's really timeline.
Yeah.
Again, maybe it's because I put them in that order in my head, they don't have to be, but timeline. And just some questions we got in our community sessions that I think are important. Someone said, does the state dictate when you go on the ballot? Really, any election cycle, we have the opportunity to go on a ballot.
Right.
So we are not required to go back in a certain amount of time or wait a certain amount of time. There were some questions in our last community session that just, I think, being important that everybody understands. So really, May is an option, November is an option, and you can go into the next year with the same cadence. There are special elections. I did get a question about that. You can do a special election. I would say that we would avoid that because there's a cost to that.
Very expensive.
Right? And so to have a cost to go on a ballot does not seem like fiscally responsible, right? We don't have that, there's an urgency, but there's not that sense of urgency. So I don't think that is a possibility, but I don't think that would be something we would explore. And so we've had some of these conversations, but certainly Jens can talk about that political landscape with his expertise. But May and November present opportunities and they present challenges, right? And so I think if we think one doesn't have both of them, I think we're not being open-minded. They both have opportunities and challenges. So I'm going to let Jens kind of walk us through that. And this is the one that I grapple a lot with. Like when Jens, before Jens talks, I'm like here, and then I hear Jens talk, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'm over here. So I do think he has some interesting perspective for us to consider.
Thank you. It really boils down to timing is everything. So there's, as Dr. Whiteley said, there's 2 opportunities here in 2026. If you look out farther, there's different dynamics. We'd have to really look at whether there is a primary, because there are partisan races in 2027 at the local level. So there's not, probably once you get into 2027, the dynamic gets a little trickier to fully understand. And we can talk about the technical nature of the differences between the May election and the November election, but they really are dramatically different elections. Just in scope, it's probably a fourth of the voters will turn out in the primary election on May 5th versus the November election here in 2026, driven in large part by national politics. So, we're likely to have one of the most competitive U.S. Senate elections in the country. $100 million will probably be spent on both sides. The competitive governor's elections, statewide, constitutional races. It creates an environment at that partisan political level that's creates a lot of noise and interference for the voters to try to wade through just on those races, let alone a local election for their school bond issue. And, I think that it means that the primary election with a more concentrated, less, it's a more highly informed electorate most typically. These are more civically engaged folks. Trends to be an older electorate, a more tax sensitive electorate, an electorate that leans to be more likely to be property owners, so are thinking about property taxes in a different way. But because there's not as much interference in the marketplace for people's attention, it allows the district, I think, to go out and communicate to the community in a way that allows the district to get their message through to people, because there's just a competitive environment for people's attention in October and November. And it's like, we'll take a pause and think about the last time we had like these big partisan races. It's all consuming of people's attention, and there's not a lot of opportunity to really dig in and more deeply understand the issue at hand as it relates to what is this bond issue? How does it serve our community? How much does it cost the property tax owners? You know, what is the net benefit to the community? And so those are conversations that are much more easily had in this environment. And I might add that you talked about urgency, Ms. Casper, you know, coming off of the November election and doing the community listening sessions that have been conducted, and to your point about how this is being considered at a dramatically reduced cost, it's urgent before the community because of the needs for overcrowding, to address overcrowding. But it allows you to go back and to continue that conversation without it being lost in all of the other noise that is certainly coming. It's certainly coming. And so to kind of, you know, pull together, continue this conversation, I think is one that creates a lot of opportunity in this May election. But, you know, it also requires everybody to kind of make a decision pretty darn quickly, just because of the timeline that we have for ballot access. Oh, yeah, sorry. Tom reminded me of maybe even the more or most concerning problem with the November election, which is that there are people, citizens throughout Ohio that are collecting signatures to put on a constitutional amendment that would eliminate property taxes statewide. So to have a constitutional amendment question on the ballot at the same time that Lakota Schools is asking the voters to consider a property tax question on the ballot creates an unknown environment because we just haven't seen that type of dramatic change to our tax code. I think Senator Bill Blessing called it apocalyptic for the state of Ohio. So, you know, regardless, you know, we also, if we were successful in November, while that constitutional amendment, if it were to pass, we also don't know how that would net out at the end of the day. So there's a lot of considerations, and then I might also add that, you know, there's a lot of people that will tell you they know what's going to happen in the near future, but, you know, a lot changes, and, you know, the economy, the political landscape, a lot could change as we head to November of 2026, and then certainly 27 and beyond.
One issue having to do with the property tax question that's going to be most likely put to the voters, there's an impact when you, and Lakota Schools has great rating, when you go and try to sell a bond, but yet the state has, and a lot of other districts are going to be in the same. Would you want to invest in a bond that might not be backed because of the property tax issue at the state? So there's going to be a real serious question of what happens in November all the way around.
So Adam, can you explain when a bond issue is passed and you sell the bond, that's done as soon as it passes? When? A little bond background.
Yeah, it would take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get everything in order, prepped out, all the certifications, and then go to do all the way through to the bond sale. And then once funded, the proceeds would come back to the district, and then that would be used on the construction project.
So let's play it out. We go on in May and we're successful, you're able to sell the bond in August, June, July, August, perhaps.
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
So if we go on in November and the constitutional property tax thing is on there, and just by some whatever, let's say, pretend, it passes and our bond issue passes, that those bonds become null and void because no one's going to want to buy them. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, you.
Look at me talking finance.
Yeah, you could even think about it a little different. I suppose there could be a chance that they could sell, but it would probably be at a much more unrealistic price point on interest rates than what maybe we had anticipated when the county auditor certifies, because you have to certify
Right.
what you're putting on the ballot based on what roughly, we even seen some favorable changes from when it was certified in June up till when the November vote happened, because interest rates had came down. But however, if something like that was to happen, I mean, that could be a situation like they talked about over in Europe with the, Greece or whichever country that was, that, the debts were selling for 30%. I mean, that's where probably responsibly you might take a look at it and say, I believe we all need to hold for the sanity of this entire district and all of us that live in it. Just hold on the sale until
yeah.
things would, I mean, that it would,
But you don't get the money till you sell the bond, correct?
that is correct.
Okay.
And we can't build without that money.
And we can't build without the money. I will say this is a decision at spending hours in these meetings that keeps me up at night. Like, I go to bed at night thinking one thing, and I wake up at 2 a.m. thinking something different. It literally keeps me up at night. So for me, I tend at this point to lean towards May, because I've also heard from community members that have been around a long time that we've been talking about this a long time. And we just really need to make a decision and do something. I mean, we tried to do something in November, but for me, I am leaning, even though I know it is going to be a lot of work and a lot of education, I do feel like we heard that how complicated the plan was, even though we still believe it was the best plan in November. It was the most fiscally responsible plan, but it was very complicated. And to have the time with not much else on a ballot to be able to have the attention of the voters, even if it's a smaller pool of people, I tend to lean that way. What about you guys? Somebody else weigh in?
I mean, I'll say after the election, my thought was kind of like, all right, we need to sit back, and if you had asked me on, November 10th or something, I would have said we need to take some time and go back in November. But I guess as I've marinated on it more and looked at the plans, it just, what I've seen is these options are what everyone agrees with already. And all of those, complicated factors that you were talking about, and they make me lean towards May as well. I mean, the like you said, the more focused attention that we'll be able to have if people perceive, I think it's going to be simpler than it was before, and like you said, we can explain it to them better because we have more of their attention in May.
Yeah, and to be able to rely on, like, the conversation about the money possibly coming in July or January.
Yeah, and going back to the sense of urgency, I'll say that I had that exact same problem as a student that you were talking about with Spanish. I moved into the district as a freshman, and I could not take Spanish. I think I had 2 years of Spanish, so I couldn't take the next Spanish. So I switched to Latin, and I did 4 years of Latin, which was fine. But we've had that lack of comprehensive high school for a long time, and we've been talking about this for so long that I feel like the more and the more we talk about it without any action, that kind of contributes to the trust issue that we have with the community, just since we've been going in circles for so long.
I guess my question would be, are we still set on this being a property tax levy? Or
That's the next discussion, right? Like, how do we fund it?
is it going to be an income tax?
I think we can certainly kind of
Or,
segue.
I mean,
segue into
if
that.
we're on timeline right now, and then, what is it going to be, a property tax or an income tax? If that's the next conversation, then I'm more than comfortable.
No, I think we can kind of blend those
Okay.
then into a conversation.
I can talk on the timeline
No,
part
go ahead.
first.
Yep.
Yeah. We had, I think it was the beginning of July that the prior board approved last year's levy, right? And that gave us 5 months or so to campaign for, against, whatever, on last year's ballot initiative. And then you have a month and a half, the 9.5 weeks that we've had between then and now. And then now we're talking about, having another levy in 5 months. I don't think that gives the community time to cool down. I think tensions are still high. I think people still think that, I think there are people who are waiting and excited to kill another one of Lakota's levies if we choose to go on the ballot in May. And you said that in May we have less noise to cut through. I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing. My initial reaction is I like, the midterms are a presidential election. This year's a midterm. You're going to have a lot of turnout. And for me, I think the best possible ideas are from the greatest sample. Even if this fails, then we have a much larger sample to choose from with regard to their reaction, whatever the electorate chooses. The other thing about a November ballot initiative is that I think when you look at the attention that people are going to have, people's attention are going to be campaigning for or against, Vivek Ramaswamy or Dr. Acton, or for or against John Husted or Sherrod Brown. I think there's going to be less of a crowd that's going to be campaigning for or against the levy if we do it in November. I think people's attention are going to be on the more high-profile races, the races people spend $180 million on. And then the other thing about it is I think Lakota will be the only one that has a platform on the school levy if we choose to do it in November. No one, I would be hard-pressed to imagine anybody going all out on a Lakota levy when you have the governor's race, congressional races, and then the Senate race. I don't think anybody's going to be, charging hell with a squirt gun over a local school levy in November. And so my recommendation is that, whether we feel that the community needs it or not, I certainly feel that it does. I think that the cool down by going to the ballot in November kind of tells our community that, hey, we've listened to you, we've marinated in this decision, we've thought about it for a year now. This is now our new plan, $289 million. Hey, we've listened to you, we've had time to regroup, and this is what we feel is the best option. And I think going back in November tells the community that, and it gives them that sort of cool down.
I guess I haven't weighed in. Again, I feel like all of us, it's a 51-49 to me. I think like Alex, after the election, I'm like, there is absolutely no chance that we can even consider this in May. And then, as we did the latest whirlwind tour, and it's like, okay, what are the things that sunk you? It's the cost, and it's the keep it simple, stupid, the KISS method or whatever they say. And I feel like in hindsight, we tried to do long-term, we tried to do comprehensive, we tried to do it all in one big chunk, which again, I think is still okay that we tried, but now we've heard that is not acceptable. So since we're pivoting so much and now we're basically still hearing the same wants and needs, I like the concept of people having more shelf space to really figure out what we're doing and not just have this be a decision they make when they walk in the ballot box. Like, that scares me, that people who have they haven't really vested in educating themselves and they're just checking a box when they get in there. I do like that portion of it being May, that I do think it would be a more informed electorate that's actually gonna look at the ballot and make decisions on what's on the ballot before they show up and, decide as they're walking in. And I also, again, another piece that I hadn't thought about until one of the latest discussions in one of our facilities meetings. strategic planning, you know, like, the longer we wait, the longer we have to hold on, or we have to hold off on continuing to move this district forward that we're all trying to do. So I was leaning November, I'm leaning May, but I honestly don't think there's a bad decision, in my opinion, one way or the other. I can, again, pros and cons in both, and it's just how you, what rubric you're using and what weight you're putting on each of those pros and cons. So I'm not, yeah, like I said, leaning May, but I absolutely appreciate the points that were made, and think those are very valid and kind of where I started more. And so I can certainly appreciate that as well.
I also think there, oh,
No, go ahead.
the thing that concerns me about waiting, and again, good and bad points on both. And while Mr. Nguyen might be correct that no one's going to be paying attention to us in November because there are bigger fish to fry, that does concern me that they're not getting educated and they're just going to go into the booth and be like, oh, no, yes. But my concern also comes in of waiting is what that does to us, what that does to class sizes, what that does to programming. That's a whole almost year, and something will have to be done. And I worry about that. I worry about we're going to sell our students short because we will have to make some very tough decisions if we wait till November, correct?
I think there would be an opportunity to make proactive decisions rather than reactive decisions. And that can look a lot of different ways. We could talk about the priorities that we are trying to accomplish and figure out the most effective way to do that with, I say, the least amount of student impact. But when you start changing programming, you certainly do impact children. You know, to Julie's point, Adam and I got an email yesterday that said, you have to wait till November. You have to build the trust of this community. You have to allow the cool down. It needs to feel more genuine in all of those pieces. I don't know what time it was that I opened that email, but literally an hour later after I saw it, I was on the phone with somebody, community member, and they said, you have to go now. Like, you need to go in May. And I asked that person, I said, tell me why you think that. And this person was a parent, and they said, you want to talk about trust? They said, you've been talking about this for 10 years. And they said, and I know this person well enough. They said, what did I say to you when you started Master Facilities? I said, you said, I'll believe it when I see the first brick laid. They said, that's trust too. So again, to Julie's point, you're trying to balance what is the largest, the 5149, and I don't like I said, I'm not saying I have an answer for that, but it was just interesting. In the same day, I had two people and their interpretation of trust. One was more listening, cool down. One was more, you've been talking about this, and I need you to do something about it because that feels like I'm losing trust because I can't get any traction on what we've been talking about. I do think, you know, and we talked about this on Monday, any priority that you give can be tackled. Right? So wherever we land, whether it's the proactive conversation or whatever we're trying to tackle, we can problem solve that. But there are certainly, and I'm going to say this, I said this to President's or DPC the other day, whatever we decide, we have to be successful. Because to run another ballot that is not successful would be a game changer for this community. We would no longer be in proactive anything mode. We would be in reactive mode. So I just think again, and we all know this, but I think it's just trying to find that delicate balance, which I think leads into Ben's question of what type of funding options are available to us. The last week of the community sessions, and I say it like that because that's how a community member said, they said, are we exploring, in addition to options, are we exploring funding options? And then in two different community sessions, it did come up about an earned income tax, right? Is that a possibility for a property tax? So, and again, there are challenges of both of those. But you know, property tax is what we think about with bond issue, you know, with a bond issue, that's the natural place that you land, but there are other funding sources that could be explored. I also think about those different funding sources though, and how that balances with trust, how that balances with messaging, what time do you need to educate people on funding sources? So all of that is kind of in my mind as well of, yes, there are different options available to us, but I think timeline and what you're trying to communicate and how you're trying to skin that cat. I always go to cats. I feel bad for them. How you're trying to tackle that problem. I think that those play hand in hand because there is an education piece to that. If you start talking about an income tax or an income tax, however you want to say that.
Well, yeah, I worry that if we go down an income tax route, and I just briefly have this discussion with Adam. If we would go in May, I don't think we have enough time to educate people. And there's a difference between I struggle with an earned income tax. I understand the point of it, but I feel like.
Adam, just for our general, because I mean, I know we're sitting here and we don't have a huge crowd here, but people will watch this. Adam, can you just review in the income tax world, like what are your options and what those look like?
Yes, you have an earned income tax. The earned income tax is only taxable on wages, so for people that are currently earning money. That is a tax that's applied to them, which would not apply to people on pensions, Social Security, or I believe it's interest incomes. Then you have traditional, and that's all the above. So typically a earned income tax will generate about 80% of what a traditional would in most places. The other thing to note of that is, although that is a way of not distributing over your entire tax base, it's also not typically considered a very efficient method of financing debts. And the reason for that is because you have to issue what they call a COPS issue, or certificate of participation, which is then typically going to come at a highest interest rate because of the security level of the debt. Now, as we talked about a little bit ago, with the potential for property taxes disappearance in general, I don't know, maybe the earned income tax will come at a better interest rate, or not earned, but an income tax in general could have a better interest rate than a property tax if people view that to be in jeopardy. But stereotypically, under an income tax or traditional income tax backed, it's a general funded debt. It's going to come at a higher price point interest-wise.
So the income tax, though, however, is either earned or regular, can fluctuate, correct? Because, well, okay, maybe people aren't spending that much money in Liberty Township and Westchester, and now you have less money, correct?
It would be based on earning. So it's not based around spending.
For an income tax?
Income tax, yeah.
It's not a spending income tax, it's not a sales tax.
No,
No, it's not sales. Yeah, it's based on, it's just like on our paychecks, you'll have a withholding that goes to the federal government,
Right.
as well as a withholding that goes to the state of Ohio. For us, we process payroll from A to Z all the way through.
Yeah, when I worked in Sharonville, I had to pay.
Yeah, so a municipal tax is based around where you work. A school district income tax is based on, where you work primary, where you live secondary. A school district income tax is based on where you live. And a municipal income tax for us is not technically a required to take. People can true that up at the end. A school district income tax is a non-negotiable by law. We are required as an employer to take that from anybody who lives in a school district that has an income tax.
So if it's an earned income tax, so people on a fixed income, businesses would not pay that?
That is correct. That would not be paid. It's paid based on where you live. And so a business owner, although they could have a business in district, but if they lived in a different district, then they would pay that based on if where they live has that.
They would not pay it to us?
Not to Lakota local schools, no, that's correct.
And Kelly, I think when you ask about the volatility of an income tax, having come from a district that had an income tax, I think those come into play like during COVID, right? There was a concern because, or in a recession, right? People are unemployed sometimes, and you have forecasted, I'm talking in Adam's world, you forecast it for a number that you think you're going to see, and then like something like COVID happens or recession happens, and that number might turn out differently than what you anticipate when you have those income taxes. So there is a little bit of volatility, but I would think, again, there's a lot more political factors that come into play in that, of that volatility, but that is.
One of the things that creates a bit of volatility is that in a political perspective is that, excuse me, that an income tax can actually be repealed by the community. There's a mechanism to do that. And the district would still, if there were bonds issued based on the income tax, there'd have to probably be a restructuring without that revenue stream if the tax were to be repealed.
That's correct.
Has that ever happened, Adam? That a community has repealed an income tax?
I'm sure it has. I would have to look to get an actual example. But that's correct, and that's also plays into why it typically comes at a higher interest rate, is the interest rate's just going to be based around the risk. And so there it is viewed when it's general funded, as well as the abilities for a repeal. Now, I do know that the district I was at prior had a traditional that they hadn't had voted on since the 90s, because the person or people who would like to have it repealed, they're the ones that have to carry the brunt of the cost of putting it on a ballot, which typically comes at a pretty large price point. But that's, once one's been in place for 5 years, then they can be, if it was a continuing, they can be repealed at any time.
And I'm asking you to look into a crystal ball. I don't need an exact figure. But let's pretend we put this on the ballot forever, whatever mills this comes out to be and it passes. How much would the bond cost versus, on my property tax versus an income tax? I know that's
It depends.
I understand.
If you
Ballpark it.
if you did not have okay, restate the question.
Just that, how much would it be more in an income tax? I mean, I know it's going to obviously depend on your income, but I'm thinking that.
Generally speaking, yes. And
That's
why I
what
say
I'm getting at.
generally speaking, yes, irregardless of what type of an income tax, I would say is due to the fact that your business community, that is about let's say 20% of our tax base.
Right.
It is not
They would know.
applied to the business, the Class 2 properties or the public utility properties that we receive proceeds on currently.
And while an earned income tax would not affect people on a fixed income, that then means that the rest of the community would be picking up more of the brunt of that.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Do you know how much of a difference there is between those two in terms of, like, let's say you're an individual who is not on a fixed income, like what kind of impact versus?
I've used myself. I like using myself as an example because I looked into it, right? Because it's going to impact.
Because he knows those numbers.
Because it's going to impact me, yeah. And when looking at it, one, it would depend on the size, as with most things. Two, it also would depend on the size of the property. So if someone lives in a property that's not valued as high, then the gap could be a little smaller depending on what the income was. If you had somebody with high income living in a large house, it could potentially be very similar price points. But if you had a smaller home and larger income, then the gap of any type of an income tax costing more than what a property tax would be, because you're not picking up those other property proceeds, as well as a little bit higher interest rate. A lot of times the property side would be a lower price point. Now, me personally, the today version of me would probably say, how dare you think that way, because it would cost more money. The retired version of me might go, great work, glad we did that. So, it's just options.
I mean, for my husband and I, it would work well, because we have, our home would be valued higher, but we're both retired, so it would benefit me, but then it puts a larger burden on those who are currently earning a higher income. So again, it just depends where you are in that trajectory. how that's gonna impact you. But I do think it then goes 100% to our residents versus sharing the cost with our businesses, which is something we've talked about. And I think part of the intention of the two townships was to make sure that there were some businesses here, so the burden wouldn't fall 100% on our taxpayers. So it's a reallocation, it's a shift, it's, you know, in today's environment, once again, I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's gonna make some people who before were like, yeah, go, heck no, and then some other people might go, okay, like, you know, this is a much smaller burden. So it'll just, once again, it shifts. But for me, where I struggle with this is it's something we have never done or tried.
Yeah.
And I feel like we got so lost in the complexity last time that that's part of my biggest fear of switching modes. But, you know, again, it's going to have a different impact on different people and just change how people feel about it based on where they are in that lifespan.
Yeah. I think it's going to be hard to explain to our taxpayers that they're now going to burden 100% of the businesses that generate revenue from our taxpayers will not have a stake in it.
I'm only looking at it from a hypothetical with regard to the income tax versus the property tax. Obviously, as someone who wants to live, work, you know, everything in this community.
Into your microphone.
That's right. The income tax obviously would hurt, like, you know, well, I say hurt. I think any plan that invests in our kids is going to be good long-term. So I loosely use the word hurt. I'm thinking about it from a political efficacy standpoint, from voter turnout. If we don't have a plan that, you know, gives a tax hit to our fixed income residents, then I think that they are going to look at this plan a little bit more favorable. And I'm sure, you know, you could speak to this certainly a little bit more. You're 65-year-old and up. Those are the people that are going out to the polls in every election. That's the majority, not your young people, not your 9 to 5, anything like that. It's your older people. And for me, I'm just looking at it from a hypothetical, not yes or no, one way or another. But I'm looking at a success rate. And if we don't have a property tax levy, or a levy that affects property tax, would the, you know, empty nesters and the, 62% of this community that doesn't have kids in the district, and the older aspects of this community, I'm just wondering about the success rate. Would they find it more favorable? And if so, could we get something passed if this was earned income versus a property tax? I'm looking at the success rate, not necessarily what it's going to do to me and my job or my parents' job. I'm looking at the success rate because, like I said, overall, I think any plan that invests in the kids is going to be better long-term.
Another thing that we have coming to keep in mind, there has been legislation passed that's doing some tax reforms to help lift some burden off of the communities and our residents all over the state. But here at Lakota, we're not going to see quite as big of an impact on that as some others may, due to the fact that we're not a 20 mil floor district. And that's where kind of the big, they talk about they're pulling back all the way back to tax year 23 in some cases, depending on when the reappraisals happen. But we weren't one of those districts. So that's not going to be as big of a shift on property tax bills. It is going to be beneficial for a couple of different reasons, but it's not going to be quite as large as the 8 districts in Butler County that were on the 20 mil floor. Something else to keep in mind.
Now, does the 2 point, sorry, did anybody else?
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, there's a 2.75 flat tax, income tax, correct, that was passed?
That's state income. That's the state income
State
tax.
So it
correct.
wouldn't affect if we came with an income tax? Okay.
It's, right now, when we process payrolls, we send income taxes to other school districts. We send income taxes to municipalities that have those, as well as state and federal.
Okay. And just carrying on, I think that biggest thing also I don't want Lakota to be the catalyst for this community to sign off on a property tax repeal, get rid of it all. Now, I think we might find help from local services, local EMS, everything like that, who would be against repealing property taxes. But again, like I said, I don't want Lakota to rush into a decision and, you know, us be the reason, at least for this community, for Butler County, to sign off on repealing property taxes. And, you know, again, just kind of circling back to the timeline, I think that a November ballot gives us time to educate the community on a potential income tax levy. You know, the community isn't here in this conversation. This is our wonderful staff, the Elevar group, everything like that. And then, you know, I don't know how many people go back and view our YouTube videos. So no matter what we do, there are, I feel, a lot of people in this community who are going to say, well, I didn't know about it, I'm voting no. And so for me, when I look at November, what I think of the income tax versus property tax, I think that if we have maybe listening sessions, maybe just put out some information, if we put this plan, or, you know, I would say C1, but if we put any plan before the community and give us this 9-month gap, or whatever it is, to November, if we give us that gap to educate the community on both this plan, what it brings, how we've listened, but also, you know, whatever decision this board decides to go with regards to income versus property tax. If we do income, it also gives us that time to educate them on the effects that this will have. Versus May, I feel whatever we do in May is going to feel rushed, it's going to seem disingenuous, and you know, look at me, the 18-year-old, it's going to seem impulsive. And for me, I don't, again, I think it'd be a very nuclear option if we get 2 levies rejected within 7 months of each other. And that's my biggest fear.
I did share with the board at the last meeting. I put a paper in front of everybody. I kind of walked around while the discussion was happening, just so everybody could see all of those filing deadlines. It's also in the board doc library that's shared with everybody as well.
I think we have, there's not a perfect answer. Let's start with that. There's not a perfect answer. I do think we have to figure out the best way that everyone's going to benefit. And I truly believe that one of the things that we should be hounding our legislators on is what they can do for the residents that are on fixed incomes. It should not be just the school district's responsibility. Legislators have a lot of impact, and they should be there fighting for the fixed income. And I feel like sometimes the onus is just on us to take care of our population that's on fixed income. And to your point, Ben, you're right. The older population, and I am one of those that comes out to vote. I mean, I'm over 65, but I think we also have to remember that not everyone who comes to the polls, that is 60% that don't have kids in school that go out to vote, are people on fixed incomes. There are a lot of people that are retired that, I'm not saying that there's not, there absolutely is. But I think sometimes we categorically think that anybody that's over 65 that votes often is somebody that's on a fixed income. So I just kind of want to keep that in mind.
A couple of financial consideration points just to raise in terms of both the timeline and the structure or options ahead of you are, one, you know, the property tax versus earned income tax or traditional income tax does come at a cost, right? It is a much cheaper interest rate at the property tax level. So there is a return on that investment being given to the property taxpayers for making that more fiscally conscious decision. There's also the timing aspect of it, that the sooner you put shovels in the ground, the more you save on inflationary adjustments in the future. And, you know, under the consideration of what's most palatable to the voters, you also have the millage, the 2.28 mills that is rolling off of property tax. That can be incorporated, obviously, into the messaging around that this is a no new millage rate increase property tax, and you can't do, because you can't, to Adam's point, do an apples-to-apples consideration of an earned income tax to the 2.28 mils that's rolling off. You just can't do that. You know, if you're gonna talk about a no millage rate increase type effort for this, it has to be based on the property tax structure.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually,
It's just the distribution is much different, the timing's much different. Also, when the timing was mentioned, I thought that maybe we were going to go a different route. Collections always begin on January 1. Because the collections begin on January 1, on a property tax, you're going to get that first payment that's going to start with the first half settlements. We'll typically have those by the end of March, let's say. And then the second half comes typically by the end of September. When you have an income tax, you typically get your first partial payment because the state has to collect, the state reserves, then they distribute quarterly. And so because of that, typically in the first year, you'll only get about 5% of what you anticipated. Then you will get, in the very next year, you'll get a little bit more in fiscal years. In our world, in fiscal years, the first payment that you'll have will be a lot lower, and then you get a little bit of a catch-up because of reserves being met. And then they typically say 18 months gets you on cycle. So that would be as well a consideration that would have to be taken into the development of the amortization schedules
that would be-
for
And
sales.
That would be
And that's
harder.
18 months after the first collection.
That is correct.
So that's not just
That is correct. 18 months from January 1 of
27.
the following year that it was passed within.
So we couldn't do anything with that money until,
You can be very similar to what we were talking about in November. It would be structuring. Yeah, the structuring would come into play just because the timing on that is a little bit more lagged than what you would see with a property tax. And that's common. Department of Tax will tell you that. You just have to get going before it'll begin stabilizing.
So even though it changes the distribution of who's paying, what I'm hearing is would cost us more as a community if we went to a earned income tax than it does by doing a property tax. The community, the residents within our community would pay more from an interest rate standpoint, and that they're not sharing the burden with business.
Still depending on who it is and the situation.
Right,
Typically,
but
yes.
in aggregate,
yeah.
Yes,
I don't know
typically-
how we sell
typically,
that
yes.
if it's,
And actually, when you do the income tax, you're doing a COPS deal, which is about a 28-year cycle versus 37, 38-year cycle with a bond issue. So bond issue stretches out your cost for a little longer.
And Adam, didn't you do some recent research on how our millage rate actually compares to some other municipalities or
I did.
townships?
What I would like to do is, instead of shooting from the cuff, I would like to be able to put maybe some slides together or put some data together to share at maybe the meeting on the 20th so that we could kind of illustrate that and also do some data mining on income. Income taxes in general became a pretty popular topic in the school treasurer world with this property tax repeal happening. A lot of districts took, Lakota didn't, we don't have these issues, but some people took routes of emergency levies, fixed sum levies, so that it wouldn't impact 20 mil floors and things. And now with the property tax reform, all of those factors are now included in, along with some caps and paybacks. So we are fortunate, although, that will restrict us some. We're fortunate that we don't have to deal with that initial hit today that's been mentioned in the news with some other districts. Yeah, we'll get some data together and some slides just so everybody can kind of have a look at kind of the high-level look at the area.
I'd also be curious, I just did some quick math as I sat here, because again, as we know, I'm as much of a spreadsheet nerd as Adam might be. And I just looked at the most recent CUP report that I had printed off here, and it says that the assessed value of our average home is $313,000. So then I multiplied that by our millage rate to look at what the average home would be paying, and that would be $2,500 a year. And then I looked at the CUP report and looked at, I could compare it either way. If you looked at the average collection of property taxes per student per year, and that was $8,200, or if you look at the total cost of educating a student, and it was $14,229. So then again, I did my math and said, okay, if I have 2 kids that have spent 13 years in the district, what does it cost on that average of what the tax, like that average tax portion? Or if I looked at the total cost, if I looked at the smaller number, I'd have to pay my share for 85 years to have paid for my 2 kids, which I have 3, so I'd have to pay 127 years. Or if I look at that other portion, I'd have to pay taxes 147 years to have fully funded my kid with the average portion of property taxes. So I just think it's an interesting perspective, because I feel like we often hear, I've paid for my kids, you pay for your own. And if you actually, like, depending upon how you look at it, I know this is all today's dollars, I know most people are like, what the heck are you talking about? I just think it's an interesting perspective to say, like, even the smaller, like the most conservative way of looking at it, it would take somebody 85 years of paying property taxes to pay the
Pay for their
property tax portion for their own children. So I know I haven't paid my fair share yet then. Just interesting perspective.
And that was something that I mentioned several different evenings when we were going around doing the road show, and I don't have kids in school yet. So I've been paying for someone else's kids so far in my life.
Yep, somebody did it for you. Okay, does anybody, Dr. Whiteley, do you have anything else? Are we kind of at a more information piece, or?
Well, I think, the interesting piece about Tuesday, right, and I know we're missing a board member tonight, which is certainly integral to that discussion, but we had slated or discussed that if May is continuing to even be a discussion, there would need to be one resolution to take place, and then the other resolution would take place on the 2nd to meet the February 4th time. So I think that is a question of, do we build that out as a possibility and put it there as a placeholder to be able to either take off the agenda or modify the agenda or vote on, or are we still in discussion mode? And again, I know that's hard because we're not all 5 here. Or I should include all options, and I know schedules are interesting because of travel. It'd be tight. I don't know. It would be tight. I don't know how you would get all 5 of us in a room based on travel schedules that I know after the 20th, before the 2nd, to have 2 votes.
Yeah, when does Doug get back? Do we remember?
Let me see. I think I have that.
He leaves the 21st.
I think he comes back the 30th, but let me double check that. I'm trying to find it.
I guess we could get a feel right now. I mean, Doug's not here, but we could always reach out to him.
I would just say, with success in mind, with the community in mind, with the cool down in mind and everything, I would be opposed to putting something on the ballot in May. I think even if we stick with property taxes, it's still 5 months, and it happens right after we just got rejected on the ballot. I don't think our community would be accepting of it in the May 5th primary. I just don't see a path to success if we do it that soon. I think that we put this option before the community, just as a test, no resolution, nothing like that, but just as, hey, this is what our board is discussing. Because again, not everyone's looking at the YouTube. I think in this audience right now, it's just staff and Tom's folks. And so I would say that I think we need more time to educate. Or is there a community member?
There is, Steve is here.
Okay, I apologize. Welcome, hello. Yeah, but I would just, again, Steve, right? Thank you for coming out. You know, now we just need to fill this room with more of you, right? And give every member of this community this plan and brief them on it, say, you know, why we think this is a good plan. But that's just not happening because we've got 101,000 people. You had 72 listening sessions or so on and so forth. And then with these recent listening sessions, we only got 1,000 people. I don't think that's enough time to brief them on why not only is this a plan that we have, but potentially why this is a good plan, why this should pass, and then if in November people, I think, will have a lot longer of a time to marinate in, okay, they listened to us, this is, you know, cheaper, this isn't Dollar Tree Lakota, this is still an investment in our future, and then sign off on it in November. I would just, right now though, I would be opposed to anything on the May 5th primary, or at least be hard pressed to vote on anything for the May 5th primary.
Mr. Horton is out of town until the 30th.
Till the 30th?
Mm-hmm.
And we'd have to do it the 31st and the 2nd. I will say that I appreciate, Mr. Nguyen, your thoughts. The plan, however, is based on the feedback that we've gotten from the community. And I don't know how else Dr. Whiteley and Mr. Zink can reach people. I know that during the last bond issue and during this in-between session, we have reached out to the community, and if you have a magic bullet to get them here, I would love to know the answer to that. I think it's hard to, I agree, you want to explain what our thought process is and how we have reached this point. I don't necessarily know how to get people invested to explain that to them. And I'm not disagreeing with you one way or the other, because we all know that May, November has been a sticking point for all of us, but I want to be conscious that we really have tried to help, you know, to get people and to explain. And again, the sense of urgency in the buildings is what becomes my concern and what we're going to lose in that interim. So it's just my spiel. Anybody else have anything to say before we?
I mean, one thing that we hear about, or that we've heard about, is the cost of delaying. You know, the $12 million a year, I think, has been thrown out. So that kind of concerns me from a weighting standpoint. The other thing is, when we went and we did these feedback sessions, the one thing that I didn't hear is your plan is complete garbage, I want you to start over.
Right.
There was alignment with what our previous priorities were. There was alignment with all of the pieces that are on this plan. The one thing that we heard loud and clear was cost. You know, we don't like that cost. That's what all of the conversation was about. And, you know, I think to Mr. Nguyen's point, that's been addressed. So I think we can say we heard you, and this is how we've pivoted. We got as much feedback as we could, and I feel like we've done what we can to respond to that feedback. So, you know, in my mind, I think it makes sense to at least consider, you know, trying to schedule something. And, you know, if we take that vote and we say May and something changes, there's 3 votes required. So in my mind, having that flexibility to continue to come, or 4
votes are required to go on the ballot.
Yeah, so all of those, we have all of those other checkpoints in that could be, you know, that could stop this. So in my mind, having that flexibility to continue the discussion would be helpful.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we need to, I guess we need to find out let's pretend Mr. Nguyen has told us that he is not comfortable with May. Would you be comfortable with May?
I would.
Would you be comfortable with May? Because if we can't get, there's no use for discussion if we're, you know.
You have to have 4 to go to the ballot.
Right, so why don't we do this? Mr. Horton cannot join us, so you are going to meet with Mr. Horton.
I met with Mr. Horton last week. I will reach out to Mr. Horton to see if he's available so I can get a pulse before Tuesday.
Yeah, because if we don't think, I don't know what we do with the 20th if we don't think we can get there. So if, the other option is if we thought that on the 20th we could have more information, more discussion about if Adam has slides or if there's something else to talk about, then we would have to reach out to Mr. Horton, who's traveling, to see if, you know, we'd have to have back-to-back meetings.
Tom, Adam, I'm looking at both of you to check my knowledge here. The resolution on Tuesday, if we were to go that route, that resolution basically just says we intend to go to the ballot. We don't have to have the money on all the, like, we still have a little bit of time to work that, correct?
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm correct in my thinking from last June or
Yeah,
July.
that's correct. You have to have a resolution, and then we have to get it
And then we have
certified
to-
by the
yeah.
auditor, and then there's a
well,
resolution to
okay.
proceed.
So based on that, we have to have a decision on the 20th because of the time in between.
Right, because
You
somebody.
have to have so much time
somebody
in between the
starts-
first and the second resolution.
County auditor has 10 days.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why we did
That's
the
why we had to have the
That's
20th
right.
and the second, yeah.
So I guess that we will need to circle back with Mr. Horton and see if we can, if you can have a meeting with him or,
And the first vote, just for clarity's sake, doesn't lock
Right,
the
it doesn't-
district into anything
It
or
doesn't
any
lock in.
timing.
It just says you intend to.
And it allows the treasurer to go to the auditor's office to
so we
verify the
could
millage
just do
collections.
that. We could
You
do
could allow the flexibility, you could cast the vote to intend to go, and then you can always say, we're not going.
I was
It's
going to
just
say,
an
could we say we're
intention.
not going once we saw what the millage and the cost would be?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. So I think that we really can't do anything else tonight.
Well, and I feel like, oh, sorry. Regardless of, I'm used to being able to just speak.
I know,
without
you're used to being in
recognized.
charge. She's having a hard time with that.
With not knowing how we're gonna go, like, that gives us ultimate flexibility. And I still feel like regardless of if it turns out to be May or November, I don't wanna slow roll anything.
We start
Because
now.
should it be November, I would like to make sure everybody's educated as if it's on in May.
Right.
Like, so before it gets too busy, before we get lost in the shuffle.
Right, agreed.
So-
I do think that's a good point. The summer, I mean, we're all here in the summer, right? But you're not educating the masses in the summer, right? So like really June, July, those are pretty down months. It doesn't mean you can't push some things out, but to think that we would be heavily campaigning or anything like that in June and July, there's just not enough. There's just not enough people because of travel schedules and complexities and things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. We don't
Yeah.
want to slow roll
So
it.
I feel like, yeah, regardless of the decision, I hope that we can continue with a sense of urgency, so this is all done very quickly, and, that we continue the process.
All right, I will reach out to Mr. Horton and see if I can get a pulse of kind of where he is and bring him up to speed on this conversation as well.
Yeah, bring up to speed with, okay.
And
Anything else?
Yes, sorry. I would just like to add the community listening sessions that we had. These weren't options. These weren't on any screens. All we had was,
We just had feedback.
right, how'd you like last year's plan?
What were the issues,
Well,
the growth
what
opportunities?
were the
and
issues?
Mhm.
What would you prefer to
Yep.
see from a future plan? My concern is that the community, again, regardless, but certainly if we go with May, is that they're going to say, we never saw this. This wasn't presented to us. You had these listening sessions. Even the people at the listening sessions can't say that they saw this as a plan. So even the 1,000 people that reached out with a thought exchange or everything, they can't say that they saw this as a plan. So for me, again, I think May is too little a time to say, hey, this is our plan, this is why we like it, this is the cost, this is how, and then have that time to educate. And then the other thing is, I will be gone on the 20th, but again, clarifying, right, it's just a resolution of intent.
It's a resolution of intent. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the actual,
Yeah.
right.
Correct.
Tom?
Data is important. I just want to mention this, that there is probably enough time to actually do a survey of the community, whether it's Paul Fallon or the same company we used the last time. I think not by your next meeting, but definitely by your final vote. So and you could be part of that, designing what are the questions, what would the community support. You could test the income tax, you could test property tax, you could test the amounts and so on. And that's a very effective method. Polling data nationally has not been as accurate, but regionally, community-wise polling, smaller area polling has been, continues to be fairly accurate. So.
And I would like to see that, obviously, I'd be a lot more comfortable with decision-making if the community, if we do a thought exchange again with options, I would prefer option C, but option C or option D in mind. And then the community can't say that, well, you never put those options in front of us. I think a thought exchange with these in mind and with these presented before people would be a lot more comfortable from a decision-making standpoint.
We also have to remember that, be careful, we can't put anything in front of the community that the board hasn't agreed on.
Well, right.
So we have to first agree as a board, and then say, and I think that if we got to a point where we put a resolution of intent or whatever it's called, then we go to the voters and we say, this is what, whether it be a thought exchange or a session or Paul Fallon or something, to be able, but we couldn't do that during the sessions because we hadn't had a discussion as a board.
We can't test C1 or D1.
Yes.
But we could test the difference between 2 or 4 middle schools.
Yeah.
That you could test.
Then-
Just to get a little bit of, not necessarily putting the plan in front of people, but to get the concept of the
Yes,
plan in front
yes,
of people.
if
I
we-
see
yeah,
what you're saying.
Sorry, to
Yeah.
clarify, yes, maybe not this exactly, but again, yes, what this accomplishes versus D1 accomplishes, put that in front of the community and get their thoughts on it. And for me, obviously, I won't be here because I'll be at the Butler Tech organizational meeting on January 20th, which, by the way, thank you to this board for trusting me with
Yeah.
that, by the way. But, if we could have something like that before I know that's cutting it pretty close, ridiculously close, but the 20th or the 2nd, just something to say that we've reached out and gauged a little bit of the community's thoughts on it.
I don't think we can feasibly do anything between now and next Tuesday with the survey.
Ben, when does your organizational meeting start at Butler Tech?
5 o'clock.
And so there might be an opportunity that we could,
Well, I wonder, would it help us?
yeah.
Don't hurt me with your public notice, I'm sorry. I'll fill out the form, I promise, I'll fill out the form. Would it help us to maybe start at 7 to give Ben the opportunity to maybe I'm sorry, it'll be a long meeting night,
No,
but
yeah.
to participate in both? I mean, an hour seems a little tight to get from the meeting to both, but I wonder if,
I would just,
That's not going,
yeah, like
an
7.
hour from here to there plus
Right.
an actual meeting.
I wonder if 7 o'clock, I'm looking at you, Julie, just because
Oh,
you've
yeah,
experienced
their
those.
meetings are typically very quick.
Okay.
So I think that would be very feasible. I mean,
If we
I'd already
started at
thought of
7?
suggesting the and
Okay.
if you needed to duck out early, like from
Yeah.
yeah.
Ben, would that work for you if we started at 7?
Absolutely.
Alex, does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me. One quick question, knowing that we, have the ability to put some of this in front of the community, does that change your mind at all about the ability to say, let's have the flexibility to explore this right now?
yes, I would be more comfortable if we put something before the community. Obviously, again, cutting it short, but if we're putting, something before the community, I think I'd be more in favor of having flexibility. Not a yes or no on May 5th, but approving anything for us to be a flexible, to have
Have options.
flexible, have options to have flexible decision-making.
I would, 2 things. I would feel more comfortable on the 20th if Ben were here.
I agree.
So if we can make that happen, if you could, maybe we start late, you leave a little early from Butler Tech. I would rather have you here than not here. A hypothetical question. You like C. If if we said to you today, Ben, do you like C if we go in November, would you be a yes or a no to that? Just hypothetical. I'm like, it's, Ben's like, why'd I do this?
There are construction experts in our community. I know Craig and Mr. Hatfield and Dr. Whiteley and I are going to West Freshman Ridge, Adena, and was it Woodland as well?
Yes.
Woodland, before the 20th?
On Friday, we are going to West Fresh and Woodland. Adena, the 20th will be tight, but if I need to do the 19th and you and I go out there, we can certainly do that at Adena, for sure.
Okay.
We'll figure it out, Ben, whatever we need to do.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Again, I would just like the boots on the ground experience before committing to anything. Again, 18 years old, you're impulsive. Going from 506 million to 289, I like it.
You like that?
But I'm not going to jump necessarily without reviewing again the actual experience. But I will say, I would be more in favor of option C and a November plan.
Okay. Anybody have anything else?
I mean, I feel like we, at least tonight, what I'm hearing is that we've gotten a fair amount of alignment and traction on C. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I feel like I've heard the board say.
I feel like
So I'll take that as progress, and I mean, when you think of how many different versions of this
options
we've looked
had out
at.
there. I do feel like we've, at least the four of us have landed on C as an option.
And I just communicated with Doug that I'd like to touch base with him tomorrow, and I let him know about the time change to 7.
And are we changed to 7?
We're going to change it to
Okay.
7 on the 20th, and Mr. Zink, I will fill out the form for your public notice.
Fill out the form.
Sorry.
Make it Adam
Oh,
crazy.
man, sorry, Adam.
Sorry, Adam. Adam's like, really?
It's just part of my job.
It's part of the job. Anybody have anything else? We appreciate Tom and Jens being here, walking us through this, and our people in the audience. To that end, I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Anybody not want to go home? All right, call the roll, Mr. Zink.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Mr. Argo?
Yes.
Mrs. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Casper?
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
One day I'm going to say no to adjournment. I